He was an incredible man who embraced the Appalachian spirit of true grit, adventure, and survival like no one else in history. This is the true story of Wilburn Waters. When folks think about the greatest hunters in American history, names like Daniel Boone, Big Tom Wilson, and Davy Crockett immediately come to mind. Yet, when it comes to daring escapes, renowned tracking skills, and hand-to-hand combat with some of the wildest beasts ever known, no one could match the legendary hunting skills of Wilburn Waters. And this is his remarkable true story. Wilburn Waters was one of the most remarkable men to ever roam the mountains of Appalachia. He was born on Reedy's River in Wilkes County, North Carolina. His father was a hot-headed Frenchman, a stout, adventurous, and passionate man of some education who had made the journey across the ocean to America in search of a new life. Wilburn's mother was equally adventurous and fiery. She was a Catawba Indian and fiercely independent, and was said to be the only person who could control the explosive and spontaneous nature of Wilburn's father with a single word from her lips. She was tall and a beautiful woman whose glossy black hair nearly touched the floor when she stood erect. Unfortunately for Wilburn, those were the only memories he had of his mother, because she unexpectedly died when he was just 3 years old. And then, to make matters worse, his father quickly remarried another woman and moved away, leaving Wilburn and his 4 siblings behind. The loss of both his parents was something that was forever burned into his memory by bitter tears, and by being carried away on a horse by a stranger, where he was soon adopted by a man named Mr. Frank, who lived several miles down the river. Just like that, the young boy never saw his father or his 4 siblings again for the rest of his life. Wilburn would remain here for the next year before he was sold to another man named John Ernest to work as an apprentice making horse saddles. It was here that Wilburn found his first bee tree, cut it down, and got a gallon of honey. And it was also here that he got his first whipping for taking a whole day to complete a chore that should have taken no more than an hour. Fed up with the disobedient boy, Mr. Ernest sold Wilburn for the price of $30 to a man named Nelson Alloway, who happened to be the sheriff of Wilkes County. Wilburn Waters would spend the remainder of his childhood here. Even at a young age, the mountain boy had a knack for finding himself in sticky, dangerous situations. At age 11, he paid a visit to a neighbor who had a pet bear that was chained to a stake in the front yard. The neighbor allowed Wilburn to feed the animal some chinkapins. The bear seemed to take a liking to the lad, and he laid one paw on his left shoulder. Feeling complimented by this manifestation of so much affection, he kept feeding the animal, which became even more affectionate by placing his other forepaw on Wilburn's right shoulder. A couple of moments later, the seemingly kind bear clapped both of his hind feet around the boy's knees. Suddenly, wrapped in the raw power of the beast, who was ready to eat him, Wilburn barely managed to slip from the grasp of the beast, escaping with his life, but not before losing nearly all of his clothing in the process. Another time, he was walking down a riverbank one morning when he saw a deer that had been run down by dogs, and now the tired animal was laying in the bushes at the edge of the stream. Seeing that the animal was too spent to move, as the boy approached, he reached in his pocket and pulled out a piece of rope and tied it around one of the buck's legs. But the deer wasn't having any of it and kicked both his hind legs, hitting the boy squarely in the chest, ripping his shirt off and sending him flying into the creek. And then there was the time where the curious fella ran upon a copperhead and decided to poke at it with a stick. Well, that's never a good idea, and the snake promptly bit the boy. The poisonous venom made him so sick that he was bedridden for the next 6 weeks before a granny doctor wrapped the festering wound with fresh chicken guts, which completely healed him within 2 days. At age 13, the cabin he lived in became infested with a huge nest of wasps. The old man that he was living with assured Wilburn that the boy could easily just reach up and remove the nest, and those wasps wouldn't sting him. After all, the moon was in the right phase. Wilburn took the man at his word and quickly found himself on fire, with his hair and his pants full of those angry little torments, and they didn't stop biting and stinging until he had run a 1/4 mile and jumped in the river. From that day on, Wilburn never had much faith in the moon signs. And by the time he was 17, he took another job, working for a wealthy man named Mr. Bryant, who was a prosperous man that lived on a big farm. Shortly after going to live there, Mr. Bryant hosted a big corn shucking and quilting. He instructed Wilburn to chop some wood and to bring it in the house so the women could start cooking. So the mountain boy set out chopping and soon had a big old pile of wood, which several men promptly used as a place to sit. Wilburn politely asked him to get up so he could take the wood in the house. But one man, he refused, and when he finally rose to stand, he was ready to fight. But Wilburn was half Indian, and he quickly got the best of the grown man, and soon 3 other men came to the aid of their friend, and they too soon found themselves planted on their rear ends, looking up at the sky, thanks to the fist of Wilburn. Not quite yet a man himself, he had whipped every grown man at the corn shucking. However, Mr. Bryant wasn't amused, and soon Wilburn found himself homeless again. Now 19 years old, a local preacher gave Wilburn a place to room and board. But at the time, the teen had little use for preaching, so he continued to spend most of his time out in the woods. And one night, he went out hunting to a place folks called a lick. Now, licks are marshy places that have large deposits of sulfur and salt, and deer just love it. Wilburn had just climbed into a tree around dusk, and right away, 2 bucks appeared. And one of them, he was large and had a monster rack of antlers on him. Both animals were cautiously sniffing in the air as they walked. This was the chance that Wilburn had been waiting for. So he leveled his gun and drew a bead on the monster buck. And at the crack of the gun, both animals bolted, but by the way the large buck ran, it was clear he was wounded. The mountaineer wasted no time and came down out of the tree and tracked the buck for a few yards. And there he was, laying motionless in the grass. Not wanting to use another precious bullet, Wilburn approached the animal with his knife. But as he approached, the animal suddenly sprang to its feet and charged with the ferocity of a tiger. Suddenly, there was a terrible struggle for both of their lives. The buck charged over and over, stabbing at Wilburn with its massive horns and knocking the knife out of his hand. Now, with no weapon, he grabbed hold tightly of the buck's antlers and held on for dear life as the animal threw him left and then right and then head over heels. The next several minutes felt like hours as the two battled. Sometimes Wilburn was on top, and others, the buck continued to use its sharp antlers and hooves that cut like a knife to impale its adversary, ripping nearly all of his clothing to shreds and tearing into his chest and arms, lacerating him badly. The animal had Wilburn pinned to the ground, and the mountaineer struggled with both arms to keep those horns at bay, when just then he caught a glimpse of something shiny laying on the ground next to him. There was his pocket knife. Somehow, he was able to grab it with one hand and open it with his teeth before plunging it into the buck and causing him to retreat. But by the time the battle was over, Wilburn was nearly naked and a bloody mess. From that day on, the legend of Wilburn Waters began to spread. But I tell you right now, he was just getting started.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling today. 2 volumes that'll make your heart smile. Click the link below or visit the appalachianstoryteller.com to order your copies today.
Hey,
Now, a lot of folks don't realize it, but the most dangerous animals in Appalachia during the 1830s weren't deer or bears. That's right. The most feared animal in those days were wolves, who terrorized the early settlements and slaughtered the livestock. So much so that the states of North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee began to offer hunters as much as $20 for each wolf that they killed. And that was an absolute fortune. But wolves are some of the most elusive animals to catch, even for the best hunters. But still, aspiring sportsmen from all over the United States soon descended on the Appalachian Mountains, looking to earn their slice of the fortune from these bounties now offered by the government. Wilburn Waters also saw this as a great opportunity, and for the first time in his life, in the fall of 1832, he decided to set out on his own at 20 years old, carrying all his worldly possessions, which were just a few guns and traps. His new home would be at the summit of White Cap Mountain, located right where the Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina state lines intersected. The mountain was completely isolated. There were no roads or railroads, and it was nearly 6,000 feet above sea level, with a vast field of 500 acres covered in a wild grass and carpeted with wild flowers. The path to the top was nearly straight up through almost impenetrable laurel jungles that were infested by bears and wolves and wildcats and rattlesnakes. But it was a paradise for a mountain man, and it was here at the very peak of White Cap Mountain where Wilburn would live for the rest of his life alone. He found a spot in an obscure cove with rich soil that wild animals would take shelter in during cold and stormy weather. And better yet, it had a clear, gushing spring of cold water, and there wasn't another human for nearly 40 miles in any direction. So Wilburn pitched his tent, and he lived in that tent for the next 4 years with his feet next to the fire after each long day of hunting. And then the howls of wolves and screams of catamounts prowled around him each and every night. And up until this point in his life, the hunter had little experience with bears, aside from that one time that one tried to eat him when he was a boy. But all of that would change when he had his first dangerous encounter with a wounded and ferocious bear that he had been tracking on Pond Mountain all day one winter in deep snow. Nightfall was setting in, and he was miles from his tent, but he was determined to remain on the trail until morning. So he scraped away the snow at the root of a large chestnut tree and started a small fire with the driest sticks and twigs that he could find. There would be no supper that night, but he needed rest. The next morning, his growling, empty stomach awakened him as the first rays of the sun caused the surrounding peaks to sparkle and glisten. It had snowed non-stop throughout the night, and now the trail was completely obliterated. But after he walked a few yards, he picked up on a fresh set of tracks in the snow from a raccoon. A little fresh meat was sounding mighty good for breakfast. So he picked up his pace and tracked it for 100 yards, when suddenly his attention was arrested by what seemed to be a bear skin, rolled up and nearly buried in the snow about 30 paces in front of him. Who in the world could have killed and skinned a bear so close to him while he slept without his knowledge? It sure was peculiar. But closer inspection revealed that the pile of snow on top of the animal was gently rising and falling. That was a clear sign that the animal still had life in it. But it was hard to determine the size of the covered animal. Was it a cub or a full-grown bear? And after studying it for a few moments, he became satisfied that surely it was a cub. So he just decided to shoot into the pile of snow. But at the crack of the rifle, suddenly the giant bear that he had followed the previous day, surging and whirling as if it were a hurricane, before turning its glaring stare towards the man who had fired this shot. The beast started towards Wilburn, whose gun was now empty. He would never stand a chance in a fist fight against this bear, who was now grumpy about being shot at. And even worse, Wilburn realized that he had left his trusty tomahawk back of the tree that he was sleeping at. There was only one possible chance of escape, and that was to spring as high as he could, in a single bound, up a beech sapling that was hidden behind a large tree that stood between Wilburn and the bear. And there he would have to remain motionless for as long as he could. Without a moment to waste, Wilburn made the spring at the very instant that the large tree was between the two, and he held onto the limb above him with one hand while holding his gun with the other, while his feet were drawn up as high as he could get them, about 4 feet off the ground. And while thus perilously suspended, the bear, in a terrible rage from its wound, with its nose in the snow and his ears projecting forward, passed immediately under Wilburn, almost touching him. But not seeing him, the enraged animal tore up roots and twisted down saplings as if they had been straws, circling around and around, and occasionally springing up to fight a log or a rock, as if to grapple with its adversary. Up above, Wilburn had been suspended above him for nearly a minute by one arm, before the bear finally disappeared into the underbrush. But for all his adventures and mishaps, Wilburn became the most famous hunter in the mountains of Appalachia for nearly 50 years, killing over 120 bears and even more wolves. He set records for earning nearly $175 in bounty money in a single day. He could put a musket ball exactly where it would do the most harm, even at a distance of 150 yards. He eventually built a log cabin on White Top Mountain, where he lived on corn cakes, bear meat, and wild honey. Newspapers everywhere hailed him as the greatest bear hunter in America. His hunts became the stuff of legends, such as the Great Wolf Hunt of 1854, and for 2 months he hunted packs of wolves that had ravaged livestock for nearly a decade. Wilburn hunted them non-stop into impenetrable ranges and gorges, and followed them from mountain to mountain into the deepest and darkest recesses of the most uninhabited and untrodden region of Appalachia. And one by one, he tracked them all down, killing 42 wolves that winter. Mr. Waters had the most intimate knowledge of the habits of animals. He possessed the Indian skill of crawling and creeping up on an animal without ever alarming it, and his dozens of remarkable escapes from terrifying encounters were the stuff of legends, but as real as the warmth of the sun on a summer day. He lived completely alone for his entire adult life, only coming out of the mountains on rare occasions to attend a church revival. And even then, he would find himself in a pickle, such as the time he brought a brand new hat to the prayer meeting. He said so he would look respectable for the Lord. But once that meeting started, he slid his new hat under the seat while all heads were bowed in prayer. But soon, the sound of shuffling feet around him caused him to pick up the hat and put it beside him. But the man next to him was chewing tobacco, and the fear of spit on his new hat caused him to move it again. He couldn't focus on a single word of the prayer for worrying about that hat. So finally, he put it in some bushes just outside of the tent. But once the prayer meeting was over, he found that the huge crowd had exited through those bushes and stomped his hat as flat as a pancake. Wilburn Waters lived a life of adventure in every sense of the word, fighting barehanded with bears and massive bucks, and becoming one of the most legendary hunters in American history in the process. 150 years ago, he was a household name, but today, his story has nearly been completely forgotten. In 1879, Wilburn died in those same mountains that he loved so much, and today he rests in Tuckerdale, North Carolina, just off of Big Horseshoe Creek, in a spot that's so remote that it's still probably visited by more bears than people. In the 1950s, members of the community constructed this monument that reads, Wilburn Waters, 1812 to 1879, age 67 years old, killed 120 bears in North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. And now, my friends, you know the rest of the story. Let me know what you think about Mr. Waters' life in the comments below. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's paths.